The Soviet Union, situated in nearly half of Europe and Asia combined, containing the largest military force on the globe, and at a full nuclear status, it was one of the greatest superpowers of the 20th century. But behind this mask of power, the nation was in a dire situation. With the socialist economy unable to support the country, flourishing corruption, and politicians maintaining their age old stranglehold on the people, it was dying from within. It was 1986 when the proud Soviet Union admitted that it was time for change. Time for Reconstruction. Time for Perestroika. Since the formation of the Soviet Union in 1922, the nation had undergone phenomenal advancements in military technology and territorial expansion. But by the end of World War II in 1945, most exploitable resources had dried up and the economy continued to worsen during the Cold War.
So this was a centralized command economy. There was also, though, a black market that was officially tolerated. It was officially illegal, but in practice tolerated by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
The US did their best to keep new technology from flowing into the Soviet Union and supplied guerrilla forces resisting communist rule in Afghanistan with weaponry. Within the Union, workers retained a reluctance to work in inefficient, dirty factories and were more inclined to drink alcohol. Bureaucrats leached on the economy, and most government officials were very old and unwilling to change. The secrecy enshrouding the Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986 forced the citizens to recognize the level of censorship in the media. In March 1985, the Communist Party selected dynamic and charismatic 54-year-old Mikhail Gorbachev as General Secretary of the USSR. Gorbachev revealed his ideas of perestroika to the Communist Party in June 1987 with high hopes of success. Perestroika would enact three major reforms paired with a social reform called glasnost to create a revolutionary form of economy combining the free market of capitalism with the common ownership ideologies of socialism. The first of the reforms passed was the Law on State Enterprise, initiated to decentralize the economy, allowing more focus to go to the individual enterprises. This law dictated that the republics would determine their own output level based on demand, and the corporations would comply with the republic's decisions. Enterprises would become self-financing and could no longer rely on the support of government funds. Introducing a level of democracy, the law created a voting system within the enterprises. The political power shifted from assigned leaders to elected workers' collectives, introducing an aspect of capitalism to factories. On the other hand, the agricultural sector of the economy was arguably the most outdated. The stagnant production resulted in high prices as supply barely met demand. Before Perestroika, the government freely gave out land to associations of farmers. Each group would give their harvest to the government and receive a salary that was independent on how much was produced. In an attempt to encourage the farmers, agricultural reforms were passed that required farmers to rent land on a 3-year basis. Turning to a more capitalist system, the farmers would be able to sell and grow their own produce. However, the local administrations, angered by their loss of power, were not interested in supporting the farmers. As a result, agricultural project funding was cut off and few crops were produced. The Soviet Union would need more than individual farming to restore the nation to full productivity. The country needed modernization. With no encouragement to purchase new equipment, the Soviet Union was lacking in modern technology. The productivity of factories was limited as a result of old, ineffective machinery. Even when new materials were introduced, the process was slow and unproductive. Factories which had the necessary funding to update their machinery found that they also needed to re-educate their workers. Attempts were made to encourage technical colleges and schools, but very few workers tried to enroll in them. It was apparent that the public was not psychologically prepared for perestroika. Gorbachev would need to institute more fundamental changes if he hoped to let economic reforms have a truly substantial effect. The May of 1988 introduced the next step in the reform process, the law on cooperatives. Soviet businesses were now allowed to trade amongst themselves as well as with foreign companies. Additionally, the law provided the opportunity for the creation of private businesses. Soon, small restaurants, shops, grocery stores, and bakeries began popping up all throughout the USSR. According to Gorbachev, this law was to make companies responsible for their own profits and losses, and to free them from day-to-day supervision by ministries and central planners. He gave the workers their first taste of freedom after 70 years of oppressive rule, not realizing that this would prove fatal to the process of perestroika. Glasnost, translated as openness, allowed for the freedom of information, press, and religion. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster was the main prompt to initiate glasnost, since the people felt the government was keeping important secrets from them.
Gorbachev was fairly young. He really believed in Marxism-Leninism, and he wanted to create the conditions where the Soviet people would once again be really enthusiastic about the Marxist-Leninist project. The idea being that if you allow people to talk about what's wrong in everyday life, and they have a sense of being active in that process of reform, they're going to become more committed to the entire project of moving from socialism to communism and fixing the problems.
Due to the social reform, Perestroika became the new favorite topic for mass media, journalists, and newspapers in Russia. TV channels such as the Projector of Perestroika were created, promoting glasnost and encouraging the positive aspects of Perestroika. Pravda, one of the most widely circulated newspapers in Russia, revealed secrets that were previously kept hidden concerning the atrocities of Stalin's rule, and posed questions regarding the communist ideologies of the controversial Soviet leaders, Marx and Lenin. However, glasnost did not necessarily prove beneficial to Perestroika.
В Советском Союзе получил свободу, но не смог ей правильно воспользоваться.
Soon, journalists became bolder and braver, criticizing Gorbachev's decisions and the reforms entailed by his economic restructuring. With glasnost in effect, information concerning the well-being of the economy was being revealed to the public. The gross national product and national income in 1991 for Russia was over 20% less than what it was in 1989. Industrial and agricultural output was severely declining. Supplies were thinning and prices increasing.
The country was in a huge disarray. A lot of people were practically, they were not starving maybe, but they were very, very poor.
People began to realize that Perestroika was harming the economy instead of helping it, and with the freedom to voice their opinions, the public began to call for changes. Political leaders such as Boris Yeltsin demanded that Gorbachev move faster, stating that the changes he was making to the working environment were not radical enough.
So yes, Gorbachev wanted to change. Yes, the young generation wanted to change. But there were people who didn't want to change, and most of all, there were party officials, there were administrators that were pretty happy with the system that was in the country before, and they didn't want to change.
Perestroika was under immense pressure from both sides, and with no support or results, it entered a rapid downward spiral and began to collapse. As glasnost became popular throughout the USSR, rallies and strikes were beginning to rise in its republics. In July of 1989, the miners working in the Kuzbass coalfield in Siberia went on strike for better wages and conditions. In a matter of weeks, the strike spread to Russia. In August, 2 million in the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania protested Soviet rule. At the same time, Eastern Europe was beginning to feel the toll of the rally for freedom. On November 9, 1989, East German leaders finally gave in to public protests and resigned. The next day marked the fall of the Berlin Wall. Glasnost and Perestroika were having a detrimental effect on the unity of the USSR, and the Communist Party was incapable of stopping it. On the 11th of March, 1990, Lithuania became the first nation to declare its independence from the USSR. The next year marked the independence of the majority of the remaining republics constituting the USSR, including Russia, which broke away as a result of immense pressure from protests and the imminent dissolution of the Soviet Union.
The idea behind Perestroika was to revitalize the existing system. Once it was underway, Gorbachev, like countless other reformers in Russian and Soviet history and in the history of the world, found out that they couldn't control the results of the reform.
With no nation left to rule, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as General Secretary of the Soviet Union in December 1991, marking the end of Perestroika. By January of the following year, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The institution of Perestroika would change the course of Soviet history forever, leading to the onslaught of capitalism in Russia, a drastic change in the economic structure of the nation, and the dissolution of the USSR. Perestroika is a reminder that change is a force that can salvage, as well as destroy. Perestroika, destruction through reconstruction.